Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to Create Your Best Chapter. This is the podcast where I talk with amazing women who are doing really impactful work in the world. They're sharing their stories, sharing their wisdom, sharing their insights. My name is Vera Elnitsky, and I work primarily with women who are going through a job loss or divorce or other major life change in midlife. And as we know, there's lots of stuff that are going on in midlife. And I really like to let people know, that women know that they're not alone in whatever they're going through, because I hear that a lot. I hear from women that they feel are the only ones going through something. And that's really heartbreaking for me, because we're not alone. We're all going through something. And so the more that we can have conversations that are inspiring, that are meaningful, that are impactful, I really believe that we can then create our own impact in the world and create those ripples of impact, which is really what the world needs right now. We need to each be able to shine our light confidently so that we can help those around us shine their light, and then they can help the people in their life shine their light, and on we go. And I think that that's really how we're going to create a really positive, impactful change in the world. So let's do that together, ladies. And today I have a really special guest on. Her name is Christy Kern. So a little tiny backstory. Christy and I have actually just met today. We met on a workshop a couple of weeks ago, and I really was impressed with all that she's doing. I invited her to come onto the show, but really this is our first time having a conversation, which I love. I just love that we can meet people online. I think that's one of the blessings of COVID, is that we've all learned how to use Zoom. We've all become connected globally and internationally. And I met Christy through a gentleman named Kevin Monroe through LinkedIn again. And Kevin is doing some amazing work around gratitude, which we're going to talk about, because Christy has been partnering with him to do that. But anyways, that's how I met Christy. So after that really long-winded introduction, Christy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I am honest, just delighted to be here and excited for this conversation.
Yeah. So if you could introduce yourself to the audience and let them know what it is that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess we'll work backwards a little bit. So I do a lot of work with my friend Kevin Monroe. He is somebody who really believes in the power of gratitude and brings that into life in a number of different ways. Most recently, it has been infusing gratitude into the job search process, which I think might be something a lot of us can relate to, of how tough it is when you are in transition and looking for new work. So that has been a big part of my life, of just kind of collaborating with him on ways that we can bring gratitude into workplaces, into the world around us, and specifically recently into the job seeking process. I actually met Kevin years ago working as a business coach, and have continued to kind of work in the space of consulting. I do a lot of training and development for companies and corporations, specifically around messaging and how they can show up in the world with a little more clarity, a little more specificity, and step into that sense of, we're doing great work and now we can explain it a little bit better. So
That's amazing.
where I'm at.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I want to go and delve a little bit more into this whole gratitude thing that you've been talking about. And how is, in your experience, how has gratitude helped people who are currently in the job search journey and going through that process right now? Because I know that it's really challenging.
It is really challenging. I think one of the things that Kevin and I both really believe is that gratitude should never be a should, right? You should just build that list, and it's important to be grateful. And it feels like one more checkbox in the very long list of things you're supposed to go do. And somehow, if you show up in the morning and write 3 things down that you're grateful for, your life will magically be different. And this is, as we can all, this is not true. This does not happen like this. And so a lot of what we try to do is create spaces and ways for people to basically have a perspective shift in whatever space they're in that they are struggling with. And specifically, if it's in the job search market, it's holding space for, hey, this is a really hard time. And there's a space to talk about what's tough and what's frustrating and what's hard. But that doesn't have to be the full story. And so even within that, what is going well? What are you proud of about yourself? What skills do you have that you're really grateful to have developed over the course? What kinds of people are you meeting, interviews that you're having that you're learning something from, that you can express gratitude for those things, so that in the midst of a potentially challenging situation, you're finding the moments of joy, you're finding the elements of things that are truly good in kind of tough times.
Hmm. I love that so much, and it's something that I talk a lot with my clients and have experienced in my own life, that even when things are really down, when you're feeling really discouraged and feeling in the thick of nothing's working, am I ever going to get out of this? I like how you say, even creating a tiny bit of space for the possibility of hope, for the possibility of a blessing, for the possibility of a gift, even if you don't see it in the moment. And gratitude is such a beautiful way to open up that portal towards, okay, there is hope, there is optimism. And what can I be grateful for in this present moment, even if it's small, right?
Yeah. And sometimes it's those small things, first off, that are some of the easiest to overlook, but also have the kind of biggest impact on our lives. I think oftentimes we're waiting to be grateful, like, I finally got the job, I'm grateful,
Mm,
as opposed to just, oh my goodness, the light in my office is just bringing me so much joy today. And as I sit here and I fill out applications, I just kind of feel the warmth of the sun streaming in my windows. And that's a really wonderful thing to just sit in with for a moment. And it does not change your whole experience of or I shouldn't say it should change your experience. It doesn't change that particular application is going to be the one or anything like this. But I think it really gives you an entirely different mindset and mentality as you go kind of from day to day into the work.
mhm,
One of the other things that I've heard Kevin say, and it's taken me a while to kind of embody this, but I think it is so deeply true, is that gratitude isn't a cure-all, it's a cope-all. And when you
mm,
start to recognize that, just showing up and being grateful for something doesn't fix everything, but it definitely allows you to stand in your own integrity more. It allows you to look for other possibilities. And as you said, it gives you a sense of hope in situations where it's easy to focus on what's not working or what's not going well. So um
mhm.
yeah, I'm a huge advocate for something so simple as practicing a little more gratitude in our lives.
Mhm. And the way that you're framing that too, Christy, is that the reality of the situation is still the reality, and it still sucks and it's
Yeah.
really hard, right? And we're not saying, well, just be super positive, right? Everything's going to be fine. It's kind of that toxic positivity that we hear about a lot. It's not that. It's no, we're acknowledging that where you're at is not great. You don't want to be here. There are challenges. It's really, really hard. It's really tough right now. And there are still things to be grateful for, even if they're small. And so it's holding those two thoughts, those two feelings at the same time, that I could be going through something really challenging and feel sad and lonely and discouraged. And I can also feel a spark of joy at the same time. And I think that's, for me, something that I've been really leaning into the last number of years, is that, hey, I can still have both those two things. Those two things
Yeah.
can be true at the same time. I don't have to wipe out the crappiness of the situation and in order to feel joy or gratitude.
100%. And I think so often we feel like maybe we're not even being true to ourselves, right? If we're feeling terrible about something, like to your point of this toxic positivity, oh, I'm just supposed to be grateful, and it's almost like I can no longer be true to the fact that I'm sad or discouraged. And I think the key is really learning that you can hold both, exactly as you said. I can acknowledge that this is hard and I'm struggling, and I can find something truly wonderful. A friend called me today and that just lit my day up. Or, this person, let me get in front of them in the line today at a busy time of my day. Whatever those things are, doesn't negate how you're feeling about other things, but they're also truly wonderful. And it's easy for us to miss those sometimes.
What have you been hearing from people who are part of the gratitude shift that you and Kevin have put together? Like, what are some of the insights or some of the experiences that they're having as they start shifting towards more gratitude?
This is going to sound kind of obvious, but I think so many people, and you used a beautiful word earlier in your introduction of the ripple effect that gratitude has. Because oftentimes, when we start by acknowledging small things in our life that we're grateful for, it can easily translate then into just acknowledging that to somebody else. Gosh, I'm just grateful for this kind of weather and genuinely meaning it. Or, hey, thank you so much for letting me, slip in line. I'm in a big hurry, and that was a really kind thing of you to do. And that those small moments of acknowledgement, it's really crazy how much people pick up on them and start to do them themselves without a whole lot of forethought of like, oh, Christy's over there being positive, I should be positive. It just kind of has this natural, tendency to kind of, it's like yawning. I yawn, you
Mm,
yawn, we all, but I've noticed this. But what's really interesting is listening to people write back and say that, like, I'm seeing the ripple effects of my gratitude showing up and of people then giving it back to me. And that was never clearly the point of it in the first place, but it's carrying out. So I think that just continues to shock people. We've seen it enough that we're not surprised, but we love every story that comes in about that.
It's like the energy, right? Like you can read the energy of someone as soon as you see them. So if you can
Yeah.
shift that, if you can be the one that brings in an energy of joy or an energy of gratitude, which is obviously a higher frequency energy than I'm miserable, right? And I'm a victim, right?
Yeah.
It's actually empowering, isn't it? To say, okay, you know what? I'm going to look for something that I'm really grateful for and truly mean it. That
Mhm.
can be really empowering.
Hugely empowering. And the other thing that comes up a lot is that it actually does reinstill the sense of agency. I
Mm,
know this is not kind of what we lead with. If you should be grateful, so you feel like you have agency over your life, but it's a natural progression or byproduct of that because you start to take agency for your actions, for the fact of, you know what, that kind of let's even if we go back to our job seeking, like that interview sucked, but this person was really nice, and I'm just going to take a minute to send them a thank you note afterwards, or via email, or let them know I appreciated this one question they asked me and gave me something to think about. Whatever that is, it kind of takes you out of the, well, I have no control over the
mm,
situation, it didn't go well, that was a bust, to, but there's something I can do. And
mhm.
it's crazy when you start reframing it that way too, that there is almost always something we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It does shift you away from, like I said, that victim mentality into, okay, actually, I do have agency, I do have control, and there is something I can do.
Mhm.
I think we kind of lose it. So I know for me, sometimes I lose it in the big picture, like, but the big picture, it's not working, right?
Yes.
And maybe it's becoming more patient. Maybe I need to become more patient, right? Like it's incremental. The energy shifts are tiny, but in the end, it can have massive, massive ripples. Like you said, it can have massive results in the end if you keep going and really trusting and believing it.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it. And I think it can be really easy to lose sight of those small moments in the big picture, which is I would say part of this is another very intentional thing that we've been doing in the gratitude space of creating community for people so that,
Mm,
to your very point, they don't feel alone. And I think one thing that was really beautiful about this last round of creating a gratitude space, if you will, specifically for those who are seeking jobs, was I think they all showed up and there was a vulnerability naturally there of like, clearly I'm in this space because I I either need to leave the current job I have desperately or I don't have one at all. Um, and yet in that there were these beautiful moments of this is hard and here's the good that's coming today. And I think it helped everybody kind of hold those two things to be true. We're all in this big, hard, challenging situation together and we've been at it for weeks or months and we're not seeing change. And day by day, we're collectively showing up and saying, here's the good, and we call it out and we're grateful for it. So,
mhm.
being a community can be a really helpful way to kind of balance those two things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm hearing that so much from everybody that they're feeling a little bit disconnected, which is ironic because we're so connected, quote unquote, right? And yet everyone's feeling, I'm just not feeling connected. I don't feel like I'm hanging around the right people. I don't feel inspired. Tell me a little bit about your experience with that and bringing people together in community.
I think I'm a huge believer of creating this space. One thing that I have learned is that you can never actually create community. You can simply create a space where people feel safe to foster connections. And so sometimes that kind of catches on like wildfire, and other times it takes a lot more deliberate action to build those connections and connect people. And but I think in both cases, in my experience, it has always been about fostering a space first and then creating the invitations for folks to come in and feel safe there, because no one will connect deeply if there isn't some level of vulnerability. And there should never be vulnerability without a sense of trust and safety first. And I think when you can kind of construct, be it digital, virtual, in the real world, in any sense that you're safe here to show up in these ways, it does start to build some of that deeper connection and that sense of, oh my gosh, we have more in common than I realized, or we don't have a lot in common, but I see what you're going through and I'd love to support you in that.
That's a good reframe. I haven't thought of that. I've always thought about creating community, but I really like what you're saying about creating the space and the intention behind it and really nurturing that safety. In your work with organizations, how do you advise or guide organizations or leaders of organizations to create that safe space, to create that sense of safety for people?
It's often not what they're hiring me for. So the best I can do is when I show up is to model it and just to spend a lot of time to the degree that I am able to. Most of the time when I work with a team, it's for either a full day or a day and a half. Every once in a while, it's 2 full days. But I spend a lot of my energy investing in creating a room where people have a voice, where they feel heard, where I hold space so they don't get interrupted, where they have also space to process. The further I get in this, I'm not a verbal processor, and yet I somehow used to show up at workshops and expect everyone else to be verbal processors, even though that's not how I naturally am. And so ensuring that I have space for folks to kind of contribute in the various ways that they are naturally inclined to do so is a big part of holding safety. If you're not somebody who can come up with the ideas right on the spot, and that's not how you like to operate, then it's no longer a safe space if you're being called on publicly when you're not ready. So a lot of the work that I do is just in trying to model what it's like for people to feel, wow, I was in this room for a day and a half and we are here to do this kind of work. And yet I really got to be a part of it, or I felt valued in that space.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now your company or your website is all about purpose, right? The On Purpose Project. And I talk about purpose a lot. It's something that, a number of years ago, I was always questioning, like, what's my purpose? And you probably hear that a lot, that people don't know what their purpose is. And I know I hear that from clients too. And they're thinking, I'm 50, I should know my purpose, right? What do you say to that? Like, what's your philosophy around purpose and how to find it and how to live your purpose? And maybe that's a big question, but I'm going to.
Yeah. How much time do we have? Actually, no, I have a really simple answer to this in that it's, or I should say a short answer to this. Maybe it's not simple. I just think often we have somehow, and I don't actually know where this idea has come from, but we have decided that purpose is some pinprick in the universe that like if we don't find it, then we will die having never lived out what we were meant to do. And I don't really believe that's true. I might have at some point. I think I also, thought that that's what life was about. But I think I've come to realize that when I think about purpose, and again, this is just the way I enter into this space, that it's a lot more about intentionality. And if you are we're launching a corporate program called Lead on Purpose. And so much of this has been about talking about, you're in this role, but are you really getting to lead intentionally in the ways that you hope to? Or are you just always reactive? Are you always leaning back on, certain skill sets and trying to shove square pegs in round holes? Or are you getting a chance to really think through kind of getting to lead with the intentionality and the purpose that you hope to? It's a little bit less about defining like, here's your goal in life and your, mission if you choose to accept it. And a lot more about saying, I don't always want to be reactive. I don't always want to be feeling like I am tossed and turned about, by whatever the flavor of the day is, but that I get to lead in a way that feels true to who I am, or I get to go look for jobs that feel true to who I am, or I get to move into this next phase of my life with a little more calm and intentionality. So,
Mm.
yeah.
No, that's amazing. That's amazing. My question around that is how do you think that people lean into intentionality, or how do you lean into your intentionality every day?
I don't. Let's be honest. I
Well, thank you
don't.
for being honest.
On my good days, I do think a lot of it is coming back to the things that, so an example would be the work that I do. I first got into training and facilitation because I came from a marketing and communication space and ended up finding this framework. And I'm like, this is amazing. I'll go teach this framework. And it was a natural progression of something that I was interested in, but I'm not sure that I was really thinking about it, in terms, it was just a job and how I was going to make money. And it seemed like a pretty solid product, whatever. But as I got into it, I realized I loved it because I loved the facilitation piece. I loved getting to hold space. As we talked about earlier, no one hires me for that reason. No one's saying, hey, we're going to hire Christy to come hold space for our team. They hire me to say, our marketing isn't working. Can you help us clarify our message? But I come into it with a different intentionality of, yes, that's what you're hiring for me for, and I will do that, but I will do it in this way. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that's true for me on the good days that I think about when I am operating in my calmest and I'm able to serve people my best, whether that is a day of working from home or a day on the road with clients. It's when I know kind of, okay, I need to do these few things in the morning to set myself up really well for success. And there's just a bit of an intentionality, even if, I love to read in the morning, even if I can only read for 2 minutes or 5 minutes, it's still enough for me to say, I know that taking a few minutes for myself with a cup of coffee in bed is going to really make a difference because I'm not jumping straight into a work day or whatever else. So not to get into, we can debate all day long about morning routines or things like this, but I think it's starting to find the ways that you can show up best in the world for your family, for your clients, for your colleagues, and leaning into, is that because you take a break during the day? Or is that because you make sure that you always have an agenda before a meeting? Or is that because you have learned that if you eat a light lunch, you feel better in the afternoon? Like, these are all intentional choices that kind of show up in our everyday lives.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing, right? It's about going back to that word agency, right? Despite what's going on in your life. And you said, yeah, on the good days, for sure, I'm living my values and I'm feeling all grateful, right? And I'm positive and everything's great. But we know that there's days where that's not always the case. And so how can you be intentional even on those days where you're maybe not feeling your best? And I think that's where that agency comes in. Like, you can decide that you're still going to take a few minutes to read because you know that that is going to set you up for the day, right? Mm-hmm. You can decide to take a lunch break because you know that you're going to be showing up in a much better mindset for your client in the afternoon, right? So it's not like, I think you said it before, like not getting buffered by the chaos that's around us and really being intentional about how it is that you want to respond. And I think that's the intention, right? But to your point, it's also finding out what works for you, right? Not necessarily what's going to work for all the other people that are out there saying, do this, do that, have this routine, have that routine. It's like, okay, what's going to work for you, right?
100%. And I think some of this too is just slow practices of recognizing, like, I have a good friend and we use an app called Marco Polo, and we're constantly on this observing things about ourselves of like, I'm learning that every time I say yes to this thing, it never goes well, and starting to recognize, cool, like, here's an intentional way to show up in the world is just to say thank you, but no. And so starting to be kind of mindful of those things. And like I said, these things are true on my best days, but I'm also learning to set myself up that I'm able to be more intentional, even on the hard days when I don't want to get out of bed or when things are rushed or I overslept, that I'm mindful of, okay, here's the shortened version of that. Because if I skip all of this altogether, if I don't take my vitamins this morning and I don't, whatever, it's not going to be good for me and it's not going to be good for the people around me. And I care about the people around me. So, I think there's a lot of just kind of, this is how purpose shows up in my life, of saying like, I want to care for the people around me and I want to care for myself. So these things need to be true for me to show up in my life well, for me to show up in my work well. And yeah.
Yeah, 100%. It's that awareness. And I talk a lot about that, right? Like being aware. I also love that you have an accountability buddy, as I'll call your friend, right? I mean, that's why we have coaches, right? That's why we have people in our life that we can turn to and say, okay, here's what I'm observing right now, or please help me get out of this, like this mindset right now, because I know it's not serving me. It's not serving my clients. So can you please help me shift out? Like none of us do this alone. And so back to the whole community, right? And creating a space that we can vent, or we can have, shared challenges, and we can have a place where we can just question and experiment a little bit in, I think is so, so critical. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. It's so good.
It is. I love that it kind of brings it full circle of back to having those places. And, even on one-on-one connections, it takes a while to cultivate that safety and that sense of security. And this was a former work colleague turned one of my dearest friends, but it's taken us years to kind of build that sense, and looking for small ways to encourage each other on our journeys, whatever journey that is. She's actually she's a little bit older than me and is in a big career transition right now, and just watching kind of even as she processes that and really looks at why she's making the decisions she's making, and kind of realizing this is in her life, this is probably kind of her last big career move, kind of due to the age she's at. So she's being very mindful about what that looks like, while balancing the fact of, hey, we've got to keep the lights on and I've got to finish getting my kids through school and stuff like that. So
That's so cool. That's so cool. Well, I really, really appreciate this conversation. I love your perspective on creating a safe space. I love your perspective on purpose and being intentional. And thank you so much for your honesty. What's next for you, or what's one of your big visions for the rest of the year, Christy? I'm so curious.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I would say one of my big visions, I would really, it's interesting kind of in this whole transition period. My business has gone up and down a lot recently. And I have actually come to a place just in the last week of realizing I need to lean more into certain aspects of my business than I did before. Again, this comes back to noticing, having a community around you that say, are you seeing this? Is this true to who you know me to be? I'm wanting to do this. And I had some very wise friends in my life who said, but why? Like, that's not you. You're not going to. And so I would say, the rest of my year is going to be, again, keeping that group of people around me, asking hard questions and saying, am I moving in the right direction? Does this from the outside and who you know me to be, does this seem like the right direction for me to continue in? And then doing the hard stuff to grow that part of my business is really where I'm headed this year.
Well, I wish you all the best. We're definitely going to stay in touch. Maybe we'll do a part 2 as well, and continue our conversation about one of the many subjects that we've touched on. I want to acknowledge you for the work that you do, for the impact that you make for organizations, for how you help them find clarity and communication, and how you create a safe space for people, even if that's not what people are hiring you for, but that's your purpose, right? Your purpose is to do this. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom, because what you're saying applies to so many situations. It applies to women that are going through job loss, going through divorce, going through another major life transition. It applies to all of us, because we're all, human beings having this experience that can be really challenging on some days. So thank you again for sharing your perspective on all those things, including gratitude. I'm so grateful that I met you. How can people connect with you? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Probably just to find me on my website. I'm not a big online person. So I'm at onpurposeproject.com is where you can find me. And that's probably the best place. There's, I think, a button that says collaborate. You can always open that up and send me a message through there. It will land right in my inbox and I will respond. So that might be the best way to connect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day and the year. And we look forward to connecting with you again soon, Christy.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This has been a really wonderful conversation. I learn something every time I get to have these conversations. So thank you for making this possible.
You're so welcome.